Without them, we simply don't exist. And yet we are affected by them more than any other relationship in our life. Today, I'm going to explore the complexities of our relationships with our parents and how to grow maximally from all the experiences we have with our parents. Our relationships with our parents, so crucial, so important in our early years, but then later on in life, so many challenges can be thrown up by navigating those relationships. In this video, I'm primarily talking to those of you that are at least teenage age or above. These videos aren't for children, so I'm certainly referring to once we get to a certain stage in life where we are our own people and either pre-adult or adult stage and starting to make up our own minds about how we wish to operate in relationships rather than being stuck in relationships that don't serve us. This video will start with the psychological aspects, as all my videos do, and then move on to the more metaphysical aspects later on. For starters, we just aren't alive without our parents. And some of us will only see the damage that is caused from our experiences with our parents. Some of us will only have gratitude for our parents bringing us into this world and looking after us in the early stages of life. And some of us will be able to see both. Of course, those of you watching that have had terrible early life experiences and it's pretty hard not to see the damage that has been caused by those early life experiences. I invite you to hang in there with this video and open yourself up to some explanations that I'll explore later in the video about broader reasons for these sorts of occurrences unfolding for you. Why did you, I guess, have such bad luck with having experiences with your parents that seem to have been so detrimental for you? And then those of you who only see your parents through rose-colored glasses and only have gratitude, I would suggest that there are elements of your personality, of your functioning that you've taken on from your parents that aren't perfect. And I'm not seeking to diminish the quality of the relationship with your parents or even seek to blame. In fact, that is far from what I'm seeking to do in this video, is blame. I'm simply seeking to help with some understanding, some context, and most definitely ways to move forward and have a fulfilling life regardless of the status of the relationship with your parents in the past or currently. So yeah, let's take it right back to basics. From a survival point of view, yes, we wouldn't have survived. We wouldn't be here without two people coming together and creating a child. For most of us, some of us, yes, there are exceptions with IVF and other methods of creating life, but for the majority of us, a man and a woman came together to create the life that is you. So from the point of view of not being here without that union, of course, gratitude comes into play for a lot of us. Our survival needs being met early on as well. Of course, we weren't ever going to be able to meet our needs for food, shelter, warmth, etc. without adults to do that. So our physical needs most definitely needed to be met. And by the way, I think those of you that didn't have your parents raise you and maybe had grandparents raise you or an auntie and an uncle, a lot of this will still apply. So as far as the emotional side of what we experienced in early life and how that affects us now. Another thing that's really fascinating that some of you may or may not know is that if we are not touched in the early phases of life, we can literally die. There have been studies done within orphanages where certain children were pretty much left in their cots and barely touched. And in some cases, they would die. They certainly did not thrive, a lot of them, and their immune systems were severely compromised. And this is attributed to a lack of touch. There is also evidence from polyvagal theory suggesting that an aspect of our nervous system, the vagus nerve, which is responsible for fight, flight, freeze, is also responsible for connection. So our survival is contingent on being connected to other human beings, which again makes sense. We're really not going to survive as human beings without adults in those early phases, and which is why our early life programming is so based around the care that we get from others. If you look at it this way, if you were kicked out of your family, or let's look at our ancestors, kicked out of the tribe prior to 10 really, but let's just say the first 7 years, because that's when we're in particular brainwave frequencies that have not progressed towards the more analytical problem-solving type of a brainwave frequency. You would effectively have died if you were kicked out of your family or tribe and left to fend for yourself. So this is why the programming and what we learn early in life has two prongs to it. Firstly, yes, we need to figure out how to navigate the world by walking around, by learning how to feed ourselves, by learning how to communicate so that we can cooperate with other human beings in the world to survive. But also taking on beliefs that are about emotional connection. We need to find a way to get along with the people around us to some extent, emotionally survive with the people around us to some extent, so that we're looked after. Because on some primitive level, some deeper level, we fear that if we don't, we'll end up on our own, unloved, without shelter, cast out. Even though in the modern world, Western world, that won't happen because services will step in. But as a child, we don't know that. We just know that we are heavily reliant on our caregivers. And so these beliefs that we're taking on board are so focused around emotional survival. For example, if you didn't feel that love was particularly forthcoming, the belief that I'm unworthy of love and therefore need to please everyone else in order to get love could easily be taken on board in those early phases. Or if you felt that you didn't really have a voice, couldn't really speak up, that you're powerless, you could take on the belief that I mustn't rock the boat, I must keep quiet in order to feel emotionally safe. And these beliefs stay with us throughout life and form our personalities. And this is where we can start to see later on maybe that our parents, or the behavior that we picked up from being around our parents, hasn't been all completely beneficial, or the beliefs we've taken on from our parents haven't all been completely beneficial. Sometimes we know that very early on. Sometimes we don't see it till later on. For a lot of us, we may even have our parents up on a pedestal well into our teens and beyond, until we start to really see those flaws. And sometimes we can flip back the other way and start to resent them and blame them for teaching us things that we didn't want to learn, or taking on ideas about ourselves that aren't working for us in our current lives, in our relationships. And that's a natural process that can happen throughout the teen years, where there's a pulling away from our parents and you start to form your own identity and who you are separate from your parents. That's a natural part of our development, to not just follow with what we've been, programmed to take on board, and try to consciously choose something different potentially in the teen years. Now, this doesn't mean you can override that programming, but there's an attempt to do so, and sometimes a bit of a rebellion in that teen period. But I think it's important also, and at some point, to start to realize that our parents are just flawed human beings like we are, that everyone is flawed and they did their best and they just passed down whatever they have experienced, some of it from their parents and from generations back, and therefore find a way, to forgive them and depersonalize some of that. Now, yes, there are exceptions to the rule. Well, not exceptions to the rule, but I'm not trying to justify some very toxic and abusive treatment and let, say, a parent off the hook for that. In those instances, clearly those individuals haven't sought to maybe break the cycle that was passed down for them. Most of the time, parents who were abusive had some experiences themselves where they were abused and have just unconsciously passed that along to the next generation. So certainly I'm not making excuses for those people, and any of you that are watching this that have had really, really toxic and abusive experiences with your parents and have had to move away from them, of course, that's completely wise. I do not advocate for staying around toxic relationships if there's nothing that's loving and nurturing within those relationships. And it's a tricky line to call. For some people, it's very clear cut. Others, it's a bit more difficult. Where is the line between being loyal and then cutting off? And I've seen it. I've seen it in my own family. I wouldn't say I got close to cutting off, but I certainly held some resentments at one period of my life for my father, until I was able to do the work on myself, find my way to forgiveness, see him for the flawed human that he is. And I did not feel that it warranted, to cut him out of my life completely for his shortcomings and his failings. But other people in my family have had more trouble with that sort of thing. So I get it, and I know that there's not a clear line. But what I do know is that when we do that inner work, when we do the experiential work, so what I mean by experiential is generally not achieved through just thinking about it, just mentally wrapping your head around it. Some people may be able to just cognitively get to a place of forgiveness if it's something relatively minor, but if there are some significant hurts and resentments from the past, then having an experience internally, which usually comes in the way of a guided meditative experience where one turns the attention inward and does some, for example, inner child work, parts work. I'm a big fan of internal family systems, which I constantly repeat to people and on these videos, and the acceptance work as well. Continually coming back to working with the parts of you so that they find a level of acceptance around who our parents were and are, is incredibly liberating and powerful. And when you can dive in and do that work, or when we can do that, we really can release a lot of that baggage. Something that I take, a lot of pleasure in helping other people do, and found incredible benefit in myself. The fact that I can be then exposed to certain, triggering events from people in my family and not have the reaction that I would have had when I was younger. So it's very possible to get to that state, and I might touch on that again a little bit later. Now I want to switch to a more metaphysical or higher view of our relationship with our parents. And the first thing I want to say is that we choose our parents before we're born. There's no accidents about who you were born to. There's no bad luck here, and there's certainly not you being a victim to who you got allocated. Now, yes, I'm saying this from a metaphysical point of view, from a soul contract perspective. And some of you might say, well, why the hell would I choose to have parents that abused me and severely mistreated me? And I'm not for one moment being trivial or flippant about those experiences and how painful they were for any of you that have had those experiences. Not for one moment am I diminishing those or trying to suggest that it should be easy to see through those experiences. They were no doubt deeply painful at the time and potentially still painful and hurtful now if you haven't been able to process and release those hurts. But I will say that from this higher perspective, this more soul contract perspective, that we may choose painful experiences for a few reasons, to have these painful experiences in our life. One could be to balance out karma. So in a previous lifetime, you may have played the exact opposite role, where you were the abuser of someone else, maybe even the same person. Maybe your parent was your child in another lifetime and you played the role of being the abuser, and this needs to be balanced out in this lifetime. Another possibility for why you might experience such toxic experiences in this lifetime would be that you sought to have a new experience in physical form. So maybe that might sound odd that your soul chose to have some experience of being severely victimized or abused to challenge yourself, but this is a way of looking at it from a higher perspective, that we seek to go into that darkness to find our way back to the light, which then brings in a couple of other opportunities, things like learning compassion. That would be a reason to have these deeply hurtful experiences, to find a way to compassion or forgiveness, even with the stuff that would seem unforgivable. And I have another video on forgiveness to dive into if you're interested in that. If you've had experiences where you really feel hard done by the types of parenting you've had to endure, I will say to you from a higher perspective that your parents chose to be the villain for you in this lifetime so that you would have an opportunity to grow. And again, sometimes it can be very hard for me to say that, because I'm aware that people could be outraged and go, you don't know what I've been through, and how could you say that I would choose this? I'm never stating that anyone from a three-dimensional human perspective would choose abuse and violent, toxic behavior from another human being. So if you don't believe in soul contracts and higher purpose for coming into physical form, then I'm probably the wrong guy to be tuning into. But if you haven't explored what's out there, there is some very cool stuff which I've referenced in other videos, including the Lives Between Lives work from Michael Newton, another great book being one called Your Soul's Plan by Schwartz, but it's not, sorry, I've lost his first name now, but Robert Schwartz, sorry, not Richard. Richard's the internal family systems guru. And so from a high perspective, or from the perspective of looking at what the purpose is for having these relationships with your parents, it can really be all about giving you an opportunity to really step into this version of yourself, this extraordinary version of yourself that is able to depersonalize the behavior, is able to see that it's got nothing to do with you at all, and to move into this loving version of yourself that is untouched by anything that anyone can do to you. And really cultivate that level of self-love that means that it doesn't matter what someone else does to you, you are not affected in that kind of way. Again, that's pretty advanced level stuff, and I wouldn't say I've necessarily mastered that, but it's certainly the pathway that I think we are all on, is to get to a level of self-love, of internal source, not requiring anything externally, not needing external validation, not needing an external source to make us feel whole, in order to really feel complete within ourselves and know who and what we really are. And I think that we can still have these relationships with our parents, even if they're not really operating at the same level that we are. Maybe they don't have the same spiritual beliefs, or they're not working on their personal growth like you are, but still have a meaningful relationship with them. Certainly if you've done the work on those shadow aspects and not getting triggered anymore, then you can potentially be around them, as long as they're not being highly abusive, toxic, and there's nothing of value at all in being around them. Of course, then always cut away, separate, and potentially love them from afar, because you can still send them love from afar energetically, and they might not know that anything is coming from you to them, but in the quantum realm, in the unified field of consciousness, any kind of loving thought, feeling is having an impact. And judgment is certainly not something we need to hold on to. There's no benefit at all in judging them. It's only churning you up inside to hold judgments, to hold resentments. It's all about liberating yourself from that kind of energy. So emotional distance may be necessary, so that you're only seeing them in small doses, or that you don't open up to them completely. And as I said, cutting off completely may be necessary. But when you process your own hurts, work with your own parts, forgive, accept, integrate and heal those shadow aspects, and connect with that sense of yourself as love, you'll know what to do. You'll know whether they can be in your life or not. But I suggest that before you take the extreme step, if you're someone who is in that grey area of, do I have them in my life or not, throw everything at the inner work first. And only then will you be able to make the call on whether maybe they have a role in your life. They are just traveling their own path, playing out whatever deeper karmic and soul contracts they came here to experience, and that's not necessarily about you personally at all. So as always, it's about finding your way back to who you really are, to who we all really are, which is love. So be love to the best of your ability.